Do we leave cameras on for the entire session or switch off, or only on when we speak?
On when you speak.
CBSI Connect system is one of our main regional projects under the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, which started in 2010 and was a recognition by the CARICOM states, the Dominican Republic and the United States, that we needed a joint approach to some of the security issues that we're facing in the Caribbean. So CBSI Connect was a way to promote law enforcement information sharing across the Caribbean region.
CBSI Connect allows each institution to act independently with its own independent portal site, but also replicate credentials to a shared site where collaboration and learning can take place among all participating institutions.
Through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, we've started several regional programs, whether that's justice sector training, training on ballistics investigations, or law enforcement investigations training. And through CBSI Connect, these trainings can be broadcast to all member states.
Academies, agencies have been using it. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants for courses.
The knowledge that has been gained in the field, the knowledge that has been gained in the region can be shared, and that sharing and that collaboration is what makes this a very special asset moving forward for Caribbean law enforcement.
CBSI Connect users can either view our trainings at the academies themselves that are installed conference centers, or they can even use it at their laptop, on their laptops at home. And I believe we now also have mobile capability, so it is truly a training system that's accessible anywhere.
We have regular meetings with heads of academies. We meet regularly with agencies in the region. We get their input into courses and programs that are being offered on CBSI Connect.
Trafficking in people, trafficking in drugs, trafficking in money transcends the participating institutions in the region and truly becomes regional problems. The sharing of information, shedding sunlight, sharing expertise is a very important tool in combating these issues.
We've seen several positive impacts from the availability of training on CBSI Connect. One of them, of course, is a travel cost savings, because you no longer have to spend a day traveling and buy an expensive flight to go receive a training at another academy.
The training that has been done on CBSI Connect for law enforcement officers has had tremendous response. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants on CBSI Connect. We have had academies putting more courses on CBSI Connect. We have had training every month on CBSI Connect.
We encourage the use of the system for both internal training and external training. And we are trying to build out the library of available courses stored on the system. And we encourage our member states to upload their individual training, which they want to share with the community.
If there are courses that are available that pique your interest, that could enhance your job, your ability to perform your duties as a professional over CBSI Connect, seek them out, participate, engage. This is really the value of what this technology brings to the region.
And that has allowed different academies to build much stronger ties with each other and cooperate on shared law enforcement challenges in the region.
Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones, Executive Director Acting, CARICOM IMPACS, who is our keynote speaker this morning. Mr. Albert Sandy, Permanent Secretary, Caribbean Customs Law Enforcement Council. Mr. Andrew Winter, Chief Executive Officer, Passport, Immigration, Citizenship Agency, Jamaica, who is our moderator this morning. Mr. Wayne Marshall, Chief Immigration Officer, Barbados. Mr. Donnie Brown, Vice President, Maritime Policy Cruise Line International Association. Mr. Melvin Sintrom, Regional Director, Central America and the Caribbean for ICAO. Mr. Colin Young, Regional Maritime Advisor for the Caribbean, International Maritime Organization. Mr. Alejandro Marino, Manager Security and Facilitation, the Americas, Regional Airport, Passenger, Cargo and Security, IATA. Virtual audience. On behalf of the Executive Director of CARICOM IMPACS, I wish to welcome all to the session on COVID and the future of borders, session 6 of our first ever virtual security conference entitled Securing Our Community Within the Era of COVID-19 and Beyond, which runs from July 27th to July 31st, 2020. I am Joycelyn Hughes, Border Security Affairs Specialist at CARICOM IMPACS. CARICOM IMPACS is honored to be a part of the CBSI Connect platform since 2018 and to be partners with the police training academies in the region, the regional security system, as well as the training academy in the Dominican Republic, and these are all participating members on the platform. As a result of the pandemic, the CBSI Connect is the first go-to platform for facilitating law enforcement training in the region. The focus is always on learning and implementing international best practices in the crime prevention and detection, criminal prosecution, and includes sessions on the holistic well-being of our law enforcement officers. There has been an exponential growth of all the users of the learning platform and a remarkable increase in the number and types of programs that are offered. Between 2018 and 2019, over 8,000 persons were trained, and IMPACS-led trainings and facilitated trainings for over 2,000 persons. Therefore, we at IMPACS are happy to host you on this platform and to announce that the transition has already begun for the agency to manage the CBSI Connect. We look forward to the coming months of transition, as we not only will have the opportunity to work with the current training partners, but also with regional universities. It is now my pleasure to welcome Ms. Nadine Bushell, Program Coordinator at CARICOM IMPACS, who will give remarks.
Good morning to our esteemed panelists and our viewers on YouTube.
You're muted, Nadine.
Good morning to our esteemed panelists. Good morning to our esteemed panelists and our viewers on YouTube and Facebook. The COVID-19 pandemic is teaching border agencies important lessons about operational preparedness in times of crisis. This has implications for the future in terms of training, staffing, cross-border information sharing, and the use of technologies. COVID-19 has triggered an unprecedented chain reaction of border closures around the world in an effort to stop the virus. This has raised the question of whether border controls are effective in containing such outbreaks. How well prepared were border agencies for the emergency, and where next for border management as we deal with this pandemic and in a post-pandemic world? And today, we have an esteemed group of persons to raise awareness on the issues surrounding the future of our borders. This group of persons will be led by none other than Mr. Andrew Winter, who is the Chief Executive Officer, Passport, Immigration, Citizen Agency of Jamaica. Mr. Winter, it is now my pleasure to hand over to you to moderate this session this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody to the session number 6 of this CARICOM Virtual Security Conference in 2020. Today's session speaks to COVID-19, the future of borders. So today, our first presenter, our keynote address will be delivered by Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones, Executive Director of CARICOM IMPACS. Lieutenant Colonel Jones is the current Executive Director of CARICOM IMPACS, having been appointed to act by the Council of Ministers of National Security and Law Enforcement from the 6th of January 2018, while maintaining his substantive duties as Chief Operations Officer for Border Security at the Joint Regional Communication Center in Barbados. The JRCC is one of the 2 operational sub-agencies of CARICOM, Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, located in Barbados with a primary focus on border security. After joining the agency in 2009 as Deputy Director, he was promoted to the position of Director by October 2010. The nomenclature of the position was changed in 2012 to Chief Operations Officer, Border Security, when the agency underwent a review and a change in structure. Over the last 15 years, he has also been a part-time lecturer in management studies in the Department of Caville, teaching in the area of information systems and computer applications for business, and also serves as a member of the inaugural advisory committee of the Center of Biosecurity Studies at Caville campus. He has placed on hold his completion of his doctoral thesis on corporate social entrepreneurship to have a singular focus of putting the agency on a path of financial self-sustainability and growth, and has research interests in other areas such as data mining and product development. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker for today, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and welcome to the distinguished panel of speakers, and thank you for taking the opportunity to spend some time with us today to speak to what can be at times a very economic, political, and emotionally charged topic. We are being joined by the public at large, and for the last couple of days, the sessions have been geared at informing persons of the information and considerations into decisions taken by governments and even by private sector. Today's session, entitled The Future of Borders, is perhaps more salient than ever, especially as countries around the world contemplate some of the following questions. When do I reopen the borders? How do I open them? What resources do I require to open them? What is the political fallout? Even what is the economic fallout if I don't open them, or if I do have to open and close them once more? Essentially, the quintessential question is really, how do I increase risk management and build confidence? I always tell my staff, don't waste a good crisis. Every crisis presents its specific challenges, but a crisis, when changed with a positive attitude, can be the catalyst for much desired change, including the way we operate and what we do and how we do it. Never in my lifetime would I have envisaged experiencing some of the things that my grandmother Louise, who was born in 1898, experienced. We would have watched and prepared for Ebola and H1N1, but they did not have the impact as COVID-19 is doing today. When Dr. St. John, Executive Director of CARICOM, called me in November 2019, she asked that CARICOM IMPACS begin to monitor passengers' movements from Wuhan, China, and we did so obediently. I remember thinking how strange it was that in 2013, matter of fact, it was February 2013 that the regional heads agreed or approved the crime and security strategy. And by November of that same year, 2013, we were again we're dealing with the issue of Ebola. Somehow coincidentally, by the end of the review of that same strategy in 2019, when pandemics was placed or moved from a tier 4 to a tier 3 threat, we were faced with a global pandemic of COVID. And essentially, while all of the scares that we would have had in between 2013 and 2019 didn't go to a global pandemic as COVID did, we have to pay attention to these as more and more public health emergencies of international concern are becoming more frequent. Essentially, it took just 5 months to move from Wuhan to the world. And when it does, as Prime Minister Gonzalez said on Monday, it would have impact on 4 critical axes of our society: health, economics, social, and security. By January 2020, our heads of government began to speak about COVID-19, By February 2020, the number of countries added to the list increased, and by then the region recognized that it was not a matter of if the virus would come, but by when. By March 2020, the first cases began to be seen in the region, and in a matter of days, several measures were implemented by CARICOM member states to allow them to achieve that ever-famous statement of flattening the curve. One such measure implemented is the closure of borders, which led to a number of issues, which include, but not limited to, economic loss. For example, ICAO estimates that airline industry would have lost between 324 to 387 billion with a B, US dollars by December 2020. Closely related to that would be job losses. In April 2020, the International Labour Organization estimated that with the workplace and business closures, there was a global decline in working hours by 4.5%, or the equivalent of approximately 130 million full-time jobs, and it was expected to increase to the equivalent of 305 million full-time jobs across the globe. These numbers included airport and some seaport employees, including airline, ground staff, taxi service, and the hotel industry, to name a few. Decline in foreign income for those states which depend on tourism, and the list can go on and on. On Monday, in our session entitled A Conversation with Caribbean Leaders, when asked a question about reopening of borders in the Caribbean, Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves spoke to the CARICOM bubble. But for me, what was profound was his statement, and I quote, "This is about managing the risks in the most efficacious way. You can't have life without risks. The question is, how do we keep these risks to the minimum to live well with COVID?" End of quote. The global health security agenda focuses on detection, preparedness, response, and collaboration. Today, I believe that collaboration is the underlying pillar of any success that is to be achieved going forward. While countries grapple with keeping the curve flattened and yet restarting their economies, and in many cases, the tourism sector, especially for us, this is something that countries will have to address nationally and regionally. Today, we take the opportunity to speak to some initiatives which CARICOM IMPACS has undertaken to ease burden of member states and to assist them to manage the risks and keep any impact to a minimum as they begin to contemplate the reopening of borders. These initiatives include, but are not limited to, for one, strengthening already existing systems such as our Advanced Passenger Information System and our Advanced Cargo Information System to include maritime FAL convention requirements. In other words, establish information for maritime vessels into a single window, which would allow for an integrated approach to risk management at borders. This would include dissemination of information to immigration, customs, port health, port authorities, and other requisite authorities. Through the inclusion of FAL convention information, this will better help officials, the maritime sector to manage risks, especially in the area of crew and passenger health and waste management. Two, full development of a risk management system with integral partners, many of whom are sitting on this panel today, to assist member states to improve targeting capacity, not only in the area of transnational organized crime, but also in the area of health security. Collaboration and information sharing is key to detection. One advantage which the agency has is its key partnership with partners such as the United States of America, United Kingdom, Canada, the French Republic, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Germany, and several others. Critical partnerships with international entities such as IATA, ICAO, IMO, Interpol, World Customs Organization, to name a few, are critical to ensure that the region is meeting global requirements which allow us to better assist national authorities. Three, continued collaboration with the CARICOM Security Cluster. And these would include the Caribbean Public Health Agency, or CARPHA, the Regional Security System, the Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency, and the CARICOM Air Safety Security Oversight System, CASOS, which along with ASEF would make the CARICOM Security Cluster. And 4, use of national and regional information and intelligence mechanisms, such as the Regional Intelligence Fusion Center and the Intelligence Core at the Regional Security System, all can lead to strong policy making and enhanced decision making. It is my firm belief that given the fact that the national and the regional entities work closely together, that the region was as successful as it was in managing this crisis. Today, we're fortunate to have representations from IATA and ICAO, on the panel, so I would not even attempt to speak on their work today. We also have the Cruise Line International Association. And while I've primarily spoke on the airline industry, the cruise line industry was severely impacted during the pandemic. As many are aware, this region depends heavily on its relationship with the cruise line industry. And as such, the issue of rebuilding partnerships and stakeholder and customer confidence is critical. And then the wider maritime industry has been impacted through the fact that many seafarers are still stranded at sea. And while the economic toll is measurable, the mental and physical impact on seafarers is immeasurable. I am sure my friend Colin and colleagues from the IMO will address this issue today. Today, thankfully, the distinguished panel is here to answer your questions on some of these issues. Let me end by saying that the pandemic has forced us to consider some of the above, and what may have been delayed can no longer be ignored or delayed. Governments are now addressing high-level taxes to make travel affordable and to restart the economies. The investment in required technologies to protect our borders and greater collaborations at the national and regional levels. So I think the opportunity is right that we come with concrete recommendations that we can make to government, that we can affect the desired change that we require. It is my hope that my remarks have set the tone for today's panel. It would be remiss of me not to thank Mr. Wayne Marshall, my good friend from school, Chief Immigration Officer of Barbados, and my good friend, Mr. Andrew Winter, Director of Passport, Immigration and Citizenship, for agreeing to this today. And I'm going to put on record that the Standing Committee for Chiefs of Immigration and Customs are due to have their next face-to-face meeting in February. Well, actually it was May in Jamaica this year. And COVID basically put paid to that idea, but I just want to put Andrew on notice that when we do have the opportunity to travel, that we're looking forward to having that saltfish rundown and bami in Jamaica, sir. So without any further delay, Mr. Winter, I now hand over the chair to you for today's proceedings. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Colonel Jones. And yes, we will have not just the saltfish rundown, but we'll also have all of those Jamaican delights, and we welcome everyone from CARICOM, providing that we can get ahead of COVID in February 2021. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we have as our panelists, as we're introduced, we have Wayne Marshall, the Chief Immigration Officer of Barbados. Wayne has a rather distinguished career in the Barbados Public Service and has successfully worked his way up to the position of Chief Immigration Officer in his 32-year career in the public service. In the year 2000, he was Immigration Officer Assistant Supervisor in 2000. And by 2015, he became the Deputy Chief Immigration Officer and was subsequently appointed as the Chief Immigration Officer in 2016. We also have Mr. Albert Sandy, the Permanent Secretary for the Caribbean Customs and Law Enforcement Council. Albert Sandy from June 2018 has been Permanent Secretary of the Caribbean Customs Law Enforcement Council. CCLEC is a council of 39 customs departments and border security agencies to include North America, Central America, and the northern nations of South America, the UK, France, Spain, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. He is charged with the general direction of CCLEC and is mandated to develop and implement initiatives and projects to support and improve members' capacity to achieve their national mandate of revenue collection, border security, and trade facilitation. He is also charged with the responsibility of transition from the current MOU organization to treaty organization, the CARICOM Customs Organization. Also, we have Mr. Alejandro Merino, Manager of Security and Facilitation, the Americas Regional Airport Passenger Cargo and Security for IATA. Alejandro holds a civil law degree from the University of Rosario in Bogota, Colombia, with legal studies from the University Carlos de Madrid from Madrid in Spain. He also holds a master's in air and space law from McGill University in Canada. With more than 10 years of experience, Alejandro has practiced law for prestigious law firms in Colombia and has acted as the legal director for Colombian Air Transport Association in Bogota. He currently holds the position of Security and Facilitation Manager for the Americas with IATA. Under his current position, he's responsible for driving industry policies and procedures to combat acts of unlawful interference against civil aviation. Mr. Melvin Citron, Regional Director of this International Civil Aviation Organization for North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. Melvin started his assignment as Director of ICAO NACAC Regional Office in January 2015, where he is responsible for providing executive leadership to achieve the organization's vision, mission in support of 41 countries, 22 ICAO contracting states, and 19 territories. He has over 40 years of experience with combined military, industry, and government aviation experience. Prior to joining ICAO, he served as transportation counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan. You know, you have to tell us some of those stories, you know, Melvin. Representing the Secretary of Transportation with responsibility for rebuilding the country's transportation system. He was also recognized by the military and the civilians for having developed strategies that established the government civil aviation authority, as well as the railroad authority, and the transfer of military control of the airspace and civil authority. Colin Young, the IMO Regional Maritime Advisor for the Caribbean International Maritime Organization, has over 25 years of experience in port management. Colin joined the International Maritime Organization from February 2009 in the position of Regional Maritime Advisor, with responsibility for facilitating IMO's input into national and regional development policies and providing active field-level participation in the development and execution and coordination of delivery of IOM Integrated Technical Cooperation Program. At the Port of Spain, Trinidad, he held various positions in finance, human resources, strategic planning, cargo handling, and the last being port operations manager. In 2005, he played a leading role in implementing PPOS terminal operating system for productivity improvement and real-time container tracking. Industry-specific activities, lecturing in the University of Trinidad and Tobago in its MSc Maritime Management program, and holding the position of Vice Chairman, Group B, Ports of Shipping Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Donnie Brown, Vice President of Maritime Policy, Cruise Lines International Association. Donnie is the Vice President of Marine Policy at Cruise Lines International in Washington, D.C. He develops, presents, negotiates, and implements global industry position on legislative, regulatory, and policy matters, including involving security, environmental stewardship, and health. He leads a delegation to International Maritime Organization where he represents the global cruise industry during international treaty negotiation and other matters. While Donnie and Colin work very closely together. He is also designated the Secretary of the CLIA Global Committee on Maritime Security Matters and Maritime Environment Protection Matters. Prior to joining CLIA, he retired from the U.S. Coast Guard at the rank of Commander. His most recent assignment was to the Office of Maritime and International Law, where he provided agency-wide legal counsel to senior officials and federal interagency leaders on transnational maritime threats, the specific expertise in facilitating others to reach agency, national, and international consensus on policy matters. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our panel for today, and I look forward to sharing with them. In today's situation, we're facing a very, some people would consider catastrophic situation. With over 16 million cases of COVID, almost 17 million, 664 deaths. Even though we have over 10 million persons recovering. The top 5 countries, the USA with over 4.5 million cases, Brazil 2.4, India 1.5, Russia 828,000, South Africa. But coming closer to home, we see in the Dominican Republic, we have over 64,000 cases, Haiti 7,000, Cuba 2,500, Suriname 1,500, and Jamaica 855, rounding out the top 5. In the South America region, Panama has 62,000, and Brazil, as said before, 2.4, Guatemala 46. South America is responsible for just over 3.8 million cases. On the economic front, in today's newspaper in Jamaica, MBJ Airport, which is our largest airport in Jamaica, has reported a loss of over $900 million in operations. So there is serious economic impact that we're facing. So what are the implications and for the future of borders with this kind of pandemic? And with our panel here today, which covers all areas of border security, we certainly look forward to hearing from them. So I lead off the discussion with Wayne Marshall, the Chief Immigration Officer of Barbados. So Wayne, you care to share with us your presentation on what you think are the implications and the future of borders in this new norm?
Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Jones, Executive Director, CARICOM Community Implementation Agents for Crime and Security, CARICOM IMPACS, and Mr. Andrew Winter, CEO of Passport Immigration Citizenship Agency, Jamaica, who's also moderator of the session. Esteemed members of the panel, Ms. Joycelyn Hughes, Security Specialist, IMPACS, virtual participants, good morning. I think we have had a very good start to the session with all the speakers so far recognizing the importance of the need to address the COVID-19 pandemic and also the importance of borders in terms of being able to address the whole issue of health, because now immigration has to deal with issues now which pertain to health. Before I go on, I want to say that it's a singular pleasure that I have been invited to be a member of the panel for session 6 on the theme COVID-19 and future of borders at the virtual security conference on securing our community within the era of COVID-19 and beyond. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Jones mentioned a number of questions or issues that we as the panel should address. And one of those issues that he spoke about is how do I reopen? How do the borders reopen? And basically, in terms of reopening of borders, the immigration department is critical within that arena. But before I address that specific issue, I just want to go and discuss a little background of COVID-19 and its effect on the CARICOM or the Caribbean. The deadly COVID-19 pandemic has been making its way across political and geographical borders, leaving devastating casualties in its wake. Many Caribbean territories have been affected by an increasing number of COVID-19 cases. For Barbados, there were 119 confirmed cases and 7 deaths. This has required governments to take strict measures, such as imposing border restrictions, in order to protect the population and to prevent contamination spread. Although most governments are still advising against non-essential international travel, a host of popular destinations are beginning to ease their COVID-19 border restrictions and are moving towards welcoming tourists back in order to restart their economies. It was mentioned, and we all are aware, that there has been limited economic activity in the Caribbean since it has been hard hit as a result of the partial or complete closing of borders. We all know that Caribbean is one of the most tourist-dependent regions in the world. Therefore, it is among the most exposed to the sudden pause in global tourism. Just like 9/11, COVID-19 has altered the nature of borders and how they perform. Each Caribbean territory is now required to introduce a number of protective and preventive measures, which requires significant changes to border security, processes, and practices. In this context, we have to answer that question that Major Jones posed earlier. How do I reopen? I will translate that question in another way. My question would be, what would be the new norms for borders and border security? And I want to examine this quickly with respect to the reopening of Barbados's borders and what measures were put in place quickly. Specific measures for re-entry had to be put in place, and I will just indicate a few of them. There's now a mandatory ED form to be filled online, and this has come into place with the assistance of CARICOM IMPACS and the JRCC, who did the software development work for this online ED form. So the whole aspect of online and electronic methods of security have come into place, and this is one area in which this is being used. Some countries suggest a self-health declaration form to be submitted online as well. We have incorporated the health declaration form in our mandatory ED form. So there are questions that are being asked with respect to health that is now on the online, that are now on the online ED card. We all know the issue of masks, and travelers now are required to wear masks on board flights. And generally, we know that when you're seeking to enter a country, that most countries, as well as Barbados, encourage that you take COVID-19 PCR tests before traveling, and you are also, in some areas, reminded to bring your test results with you as proof. It should also be mentioned that the test results must be from an accredited body, and there are a list of accredited bodies which is available on the website where the person will fill the online ED card. Now, travelers without documented negative PCR tests will be required to take a test on arrival, and they will be required to be quarantined until the results of that test is back. Travelers may also be required to answer health questions from health personnel, and it must be stressed that even though a person brings a negative test, that does not necessarily suggest that you will not be questioned, because there are other areas and other types of information that may be required that may not necessarily relate to the actual negative test, but it may relate to where you would have traveled and such areas like that, and whether you are coming from a high risk or low risk area. Now, there are also requirements on arrival. What I mentioned before are requirements pre-arrival, and there are also requirements in terms of arrival. And I'll go through these quickly. There'll be temperature screening. We mentioned before that persons should present an obligatory PCR test and the quarantine. And if not, obviously, they would have the testing at the airport. And there are also specific conditions for persons when they are here in the island. Each person is required to abide by all health measures in place related to COVID-19 reduction, including physical distancing, hygiene practices, and other relevant measures. Travelers who are from high-risk areas are required to get a test after 7 days or be monitored for a 14-day period. So all these are measures that have been put in place given the dire situation with COVID-19 pandemic. But as I read those conditions out, I'm sure you were saying to yourselves that these are a lot of requirements, a lot of conditions to be met. And how is a country supposed to rise to the occasion with respect to meeting these requirements and specifications? Well, my solution to that, and something that has been given as a solution to assist these areas with, is that of information technology. And my thesis on this is that border security must use innovative measures in this national prevention and containment of the pandemic, and that future borders must, if they want to be effective and efficient, leverage existing and develop new border control technology. Now, the objective of this would be, or could be, to identify passengers that could potentially pose health risks to the country. And there's at least one country that has used API and PNR to assist with this process. Now, I recognize that my time is drawing to an end. It has not drawn to an end already, but what I would say is that there are some countries that are utilizing information technology, and for the Caribbean to meet the needs in order to address the COVID-19 pandemic. We also, and I use the term continue, because some countries have already started, we need to continue to use this innovative information technology in our border security if we are to succeed. My one other addition to that is we also have to find new ways of doing business and encouraging persons to visit our country. And as you would know, some countries are leveraging the fact that persons from other jurisdictions want to work from remote locations. And Barbados has risen to the occasion and has developed a 12-month welcome stamp to encourage people to work remotely from Barbados, who have companies from other jurisdictions. So this can be discussed further during the session. But my final point is that we need to develop innovative ways of encouraging persons back into the Caribbean. And we also need to leverage technology and develop new technologies to assist with immigration and countries' fight against COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wayne. Very insightful presentation. As I taken from it, the API, the PNR. What is most critical now is evidently the issue of passenger data. It is going to be a critical tool for border security officials. So very insightful. And that 12-month welcome stamp, definitely, and I'll have to have a word on that. Our next presenter this morning is Mr. Albert Sandy, Permanent Secretary in the Caribbean Custom Law Enforcement Council. So Albert, over to you now, and we look forward to your insight on how to deal with the COVID-19 and the borders for the future.
Thank you, sir. Albert, if you're speaking, your mic is still muted, if I'm not mistaken, because we can't hear you. Yes. Yeah, I'm on. Okay. Thank you very much. And I would like to say thank you very much for the invitation to the Caribbean Customs Law Enforcement Council to participate in this distinguished meeting and to meet with you and discuss with all of you distinguished gentlemen. I would like to adopt the introductory protocol that has been established already by the previous speaker. And again, we want to say thank you very much. We want to also commend CARICOM for impacts for this tremendous and well-organized conference. COVID and the future of the borders. Just very briefly, the effect of COVID-19. And I indicated, as I indicate on this slide, these are figures from yesterday, the 28th of July, 2020, from 4:52 p.m. from the WHO site. When you consider the infection and death rates numbers in the United States, Canada, UK, China, France, Panama, and Jamaica, chosen especially because the United States, Canada, and the UK, that's where we get most of our tourists from, including France and the other French departments in the Caribbean. China, Panama, the US, and Canada, we also get much of our cargo from. And also Jamaica as a hub, a transit hub for us in respect to not only of passengers, but also cargo coming out of Panama or from the Orient. And so since these countries are so affected, you could very well understand how it will affect not only the work of customs within the Caribbean basin, but also immigration and other border security agencies in the region. And so this is so important to us, the United States especially. Things seem to be so much a problem. I wanted to quote from the Economic Bulletin, ECB, where we have that the COVID-19 pandemic, just to look at the economic effect of it, the COVID-19 pandemic has paralyzed the global economy with measures to contain the spread of the virus taken by governments across the globe being a driving factor behind the recent sharp decline in economic activity. Several countries have recently started easing containment measures, but this process is likely to be very gradual. And I highlighted here the June 2020 Eurosystem staff macroeconomic projection states that world real GDP, which excludes the euro area, will contract by 4% this year. The pace of this contraction is faster and its magnitude, and this is, I think, is very, very insightful, very informative. The pace of this contraction is faster and its magnitude greater than seen in the Great Recession. That must speak very loudly to us. And of course, lower down, we see that following a sharp contraction in the first 2 quarters of 2020, global activity is projected to start to recover in the 3rd quarter and to increase by 6% and 3.9% 2021, 2022. And of course, it all depends on whether or not we have a second phase, which could very well be during the next couple months. So in respect of customs and border security agencies, it is important to us that the global trade has been severely affected because logistics, disruptions and closed borders amplify the impact of the fallout, end of quote. Just one more point on a few more points on the effects at the borders, the Caribbean borders. We saw national curfews and lockdowns, reduced border controls. In our lifetime, we didn't expect to see hotels, travel, tourism, and allied services completely shut down for months. Sharp declines in general cargo and express packages. Air passenger, cruise passengers, travel shut down. There's severe decline in revenue collection, which deals a severe blow to our economies and the government coffers, of course. And of course, there is the general fear of death, many are, and of course, the fear of community spread but due to smugglers evading border controls. And that is a very serious concern within the region, especially during the shutdown period. The implications for border management. It highlights the essentiality and the importance of border security agencies and their functions to the national and global security, to political stability of our countries, to the global economic prosperity and social peace of our nations. And under that, the financial and economic survival and the recovery of the states. The law enforcement agencies, the border security agencies, their importance is highlighted by this COVID-19 pandemic. The global health, preservation of life and standards of living in our countries also rests upon our border security agencies and the health departments. The need to properly resource border agencies again comes to the fore, to properly resource border security agencies and the functions that they undertake. The need to reconsider also the future of borders and border management. All these things come to the fore. Now, in respect of the future of borders, we can even look back briefly and see and mention concerning the location and the mobility of borders. We remember that when 9/11 occurred in the United States, in respect of the terrorist attacks, the USA, by policy, moved its borders further from the national territory to foreign lands. And there we have the mobility of borders. Their desire was to detect and intercept threats at their origin before these threats could reach the homeland in order to protect the homeland. The United States created the Homeland Security Department, USCBP, TSA, ICE, etc. And here I quote that there were forward posts were created, that is forward border security posts, were created in various countries, including the Caribbean. And I quote directly from the strategic framework of the DHS in the year 2019. It says that DHS is working to raise the baseline for aviation transportation system security globally, not regionally, but globally by implementing enhanced security measures, both seen and unseen at all airports that are last points of departure to the United States in 105 countries. 105 countries. The measures include, firstly, enhanced screening and vetting systems for travelers and cargo. Secondly, updated security inspection regulations at airports. And 3, refined mechanisms for mitigating insider threats. And that has to do not just with the homeland, but with those 105 countries where they have set up advanced posts. And so we see this is one important aspect of Caribbean, especially Caribbean borders in the future as a result of COVID-19. We need to seek to move the borders a little further from home. We do have that as we speak about the bubble, of course. Now we feel more responsible to be our brother's keeper. And so this is a wonderful thing for us, as Lieutenant Colonel said, that we are definitely not to waste this pandemic. One prime minister used to say that a hurricane is a terrible thing to waste, and so also a pandemic is. Future borders. We have to consider the porosity and the vulnerability of our Caribbean borders because it comprises of numerous islands. Therefore, we have maritime borders. There are some land borders, for example, in Belize, Guyana, Haiti, and Suriname. But one of the major hindrances or limitations is that we are small island developing states generally. And as a result of that, we have limited resources to police our vast regional disconnected borders. And so therefore, how are we going to deal with this in the immediate future? Some of the same recommendations ring true now, but the urgency, there is great urgency to make sure that they are implemented. For example, collaboration, customs to customs, whether regional and international, customs to customs collaboration, customs to other law enforcement agencies collaboration. The United States saw the importance of that. We also recognize the importance of being able to share information, to collaborate with, to work with our other law enforcement agencies as the police, as the Marine Police, the Coast Guard, etc., immigration, and customs to private sector collaboration, both local and foreign, in the sharing of best practices, in the sharing of know-how, and in under control situations, the sharing of intelligence to facilitate trade and enforce restrictions and prohibitions. There needs to be more joint risk assessments between our entities. Joint profiling and targeting of high-risk cargo. We are thankful for what we have going on with impacts and the RFC. We are very thankful for that. To facilitate trade and to enforce restrictions and prohibitions according to law. There must be joint risk assessments, profiling and targeting of high-risk cargo, passengers and conveyances. And this will allow us to facilitate low-risk cargo, passengers, and conveyances, because even in the face of pandemics, trade facilitation is absolutely important, even though you don't have passengers moving, but conveyances and cargo, which are still moving, need to be facilitated with the least disturbance as possible. The future of our borders need to be smart. They need to be connected, and they need to be equipped. Again, we have resources. And I think one of the means to ensure the smartness of our borders is to implement single window environments. This is absolutely important because it encourages traders to comply to all government, national revenue, license, quarantine, port requirements, and procedures. It encourages them, in fact, we should adopt the whole of government networked system approach. There should be virtual law enforcement groups if they were needed, because we need to be able to share information and intelligence within a secure environment. So though we may have single windows within the region, applying a whole of government network approach, but there need to be virtual law enforcement groups where needed. And of course, as mentioned yesterday by many professionals, strong cybersecurity measures. Another point, the fourth, is the non-intrusive electronic inspection equipment that must be now implemented at or provided to law enforcement agencies at the border. We know that some of them could be expensive, but according to a friend of mine, it says, can we afford not to have it? There must be adequate X-ray, particle, radiation scanning, and camera equipment to expedite security screening, enhance surveillance, and reduce delays in cargo, passenger, luggage, and conveyance processing. The radar surveillance network system in the region, we need these things to be up and running so that we can have real-time maritime and air domain awareness so that we could take action where necessary, both in respect of contraband, but also in respect of dealing with the pandemic, because you do have those people who will not comply and will move from place to place, whether by air or by sea, outside the system. Watching the time, I know it's about time now, but I'll try to finish very quickly, just a few more. The future of our borders. There must be coordinated and intelligence-supported risk management regimes. It seems as if there is severe retardation or some level of retardation or slothfulness in respect of adopting in a wholesale and in a community manner the implementation of risk management regimes. Customs, immigration, and other systems, we cannot operate without properly established risk management regimes. They require online communication system aided by advanced AI software to enhance the hit and detection rate. They must be supported by well-trained risk management and intelligence units. It's one thing to have a policy, but the implementation of that policy requires on-the-ground risk management and intelligence units to activate them. Reliable risk assessment and actionable intelligence products, highly trained and resourced mobile teams. And this is an area where CARICOM, CICLEC, and other agencies could work together to develop or to strengthen existing special operations or mobile teams at the border to implement these policies. Highly trained resource canine teams. I think that's another thing that is very important. There are proposals already existing and some have been distributed. So these are some, the coordination between our agencies. The implementation of World Customs Organization tools, I read a few of them. For example, the safe framework of standards that seek to facilitate and secure the chain of supply or the supply chain. The revised Kyoto Convention, which also helps with that. It's moving customs and the border security agencies towards the 21st century mode of modernization. Also, the Caribbean Customs Law Enforcement Council has played its part over the years from the 1970s to the present and continues. The CICLEC capacity building programs, both face-to-face and online. We have junior officer basic courses, middle management courses, rules of origin courses, enforcement liaison officer seminars, and so on. And one that was extremely successful from 2000 up to 1999 up to the present is the regional airports anti-smuggling operations, where special operations or anti-smuggling teams were implemented. And we had significant, phenomenal results in respect of drug, currency, and the prevention of other forms of smuggling through seizures. And we want to say the maximizing of the use of existing structures, for example, CICLEC, CARICOM IMPACS, and various other institutions within the region. CICLEC has spent, over the last few years, substantial amounts of money in respect of improving the RCS and the SailQuest system, which is an online processing system for pleasure yachts and small vessels. Not only for, it is good, it could be used by port health officers, by customs officers, by Coast Guard agencies, etc. And of course, impacts. It could be used for scrubbing of data also, but I think it is necessary to make sure that this system becomes mandatory in the region. It does not contradict the existing system of impact because it is actually an administrative tool for the processing of small vessels. And I know time is up, so I would like to just point out to you at the bottom of this slide that we also have developed a regional aircraft declaration system, which is an administrative online tool for processing private aircrafts and passengers at regional airports, private aircrafts and passengers who come on them. It's an administrative tool. So it helps to fit into that gap. They still have the responsibility to report through impacts, but then here we give customs throughout the region an administrative tool, just as RCS, that they can use for pre-arrival notification and also for the processing of passengers and private aircrafts at the borders. These are some ideas which we posit could be useful in considering the borders of the future in view of our great lessons from the COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Albert. Very informative. I like that idea there of that new form. But one of the big takeaways is the issue of greater coordination between agencies that operate at the borders. When a person thinks it's just immigration and customs, but there's port security, there's port health, there are airlines, shipping lines, and a myriad of other agencies and departments which play a critical role in the securing of the borders. The new approach that you have brought to the table, that we must take a new approach, especially in facing these new challenges. So thank you again for that, Albert. We now have Alejandro Marino, the Manager of Security and Facilitation. Alejandro.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Morning, Alejandro.
Let me just start here, 1 second. Okay, so thank you very much and good day to all the distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, and for the opportunity to participate in this important meeting. I will provide a quick overview on the impact of COVID-19 to the global air transport industry and specifically the Caribbean, highlighting what we need for the restart and the consequential return to the skies. So to start with, just a snapshot on what we contribute as an industry globally. We support over 65 million jobs and contribute $2.7 trillion to the global GDP, which basically equals to 3.6% of the global GDP. If aviation were to be a country, we would rank 20th size by GDP, similar to Switzerland or Argentina. Every single day in 2019, last year, we moved more than 12 million passengers, through in the skies, in more than 106,000 flights and almost 18 billion worth of goods carried worldwide. But then COVID came, and currently we are down by 50%, basically moving 6 million passengers worldwide in 63,000 flights, and with a slight reduction of 3 billion worth of goods carried by air. As seen, the air connectivity obviously has been seriously disrupted. And when we talk about connectivity, we not only talk about connecting people, but we also refer to world commerce, investment, capital, and the exchange of ideas. So if we compare what the plane movements on a day, on any given day last year, for example, July 2019, to what we're seeing currently in July 2020, we can see some differences in aircraft movement, especially in the US, Europe, Asia, LATAM, and the Caribbean regions, as well as Africa. The number of daily flights worldwide were down 50% lower as of last week in comparison to that same time last year. And putting things into context, well, the COVID crisis has brought the industry to a standstill, with the exception of a few domestic flights within the US and Asia. More than 4.5 million flights have been canceled, and that translates into a reduction for the LATAM and the Caribbean region of a negative 77.3%. We also have to bear in mind that some markets remained open in this region, such as, for example, Chile, Brazil, Mexico, and most recently Peru and Ecuador, who have opened their borders. So given that this region does not have a significant domestic market, we need to explore activating the regional markets and pushing for those travel bubbles to make that happen. With the flights decreasing and in some cases not even operating, obviously the profit margins are also in the negative. This region, as seen in the Latin American and Caribbean side, was already losing money before, but with the COVID crisis, our loss is much greater now. And for this region specifically, we are estimating a 4 billion loss in profit. And that also translates into a net profit loss per passenger in the negative side as well. So for this region, we're calculating it in almost $28 per passenger. On the recovery side, we estimate reaching 2019 levels in relation to the domestic market around in 2022, and for the international market or segment in 2024. So that means it's gonna be a slow recovery, but we're expecting to reach those levels in those years again. And lastly, we also estimate or expect demand to double in the next 20 years as we had previously expected it to. So to reach around 8 billion passengers per year in the year 2040. So how do we translate all this in the Caribbean and the impact that aviation has on the Caribbean? As we know, the Caribbean is the most tourism dependent region in the world, and the crisis of COVID has impacted negatively the entire travel and tourism supply chain. If we look at the aviation sector only, the impact has been on a negative 5.3 billion on revenue, and that means a change in the GDP also attributed to aviation, which is a negative 740 million. We also expect a job loss of 23,000 jobs only looking in aviation. But aviation is only one side of the equation, and the impact on the wider economy, which you can see on the right hand of the screen, is represented as follows. So in terms of GDP, we expect an impact of negative 6.45 billion and around 350,000 jobs that are at risk. So just to say that the challenge that the COVID poses on us is totally unprecedented and critical. So now that we understand a bit the impact that COVID-19 has had and the expected recovery time, how do we actually get international operations back in the air? So unfortunately, our hemisphere, our Western hemisphere, is the region that has been most impacted by the crisis. Despite some of the countries opening their borders and reactivating operations, some others are still extending their border closures given the increase in cases being reported. So it is also relevant to note that this region specifically is very vulnerable to natural disasters, and we fully understand the extra caution that governments need to take to ensure the viability of the already fragile healthcare systems and small populations. So this is just another challenge that we must not ignore at all. And in this sense, what we need to do is to work together, prepare ourselves to confront in the most harmonized way the situation. Every challenge in aviation requires a team effort to solve it. And the biggest challenge in commercial aviation history is restarting an industry that has ceased to operate almost fully across borders while ensuring that this is not a meaningful vector for the spread of the disease. Meeting this challenge obviously implies significant changes across the air travel experience, meaning pre-flight, departure airport, and onboard and post-flight experience. What 9/11 has also shown us, and from that experience of a couple of years ago, is that we need to work in an orderly and coordinated fashion in order to restart the industry. Otherwise, we will end up with a patchwork of rules and regulations for a globally operating industry, which is exactly what we don't want to happen from lessons learned. So what have we done to date? We've worked very closely with ACI and ACAO in helping governments come up with some sort of protocols to restart the industry. These protocols basically compile a list of measures and recommendations that ICAO has put forward in the ICAO card take-up document. And we've been working collaboratively to ensure that all states adhere to these recommendations to ensure a globally and harmonized approach to the restart of the operation. This will ensure not only airlines having having it more like easy to operate in each country, but also to ensure that measures between countries and for passengers are also agreed and harmonized. What we're proposing, and you might be already fully aware of this, is a series of measures in each of the travel phases, measures that are existent, that already exist, that are easy to implement, and that actually complement each other between one and another. Public health is seen as a key component of a resilient aviation transportation system, same as it is for security and for safety. In this sense, I would also like to commend and applaud all the Caribbean states that have moved to electronic transmission of health and contact data to ensure not only more complete and accurate information being transmitted to the governments by the passengers, but also to improve in the passenger facilitation processes and ultimately enhance the risk assessments of all passengers visiting the Caribbean. Nevertheless, we are seeing some states imposing measures that are not fully in line with what ICAO has established. And I've included here some of the measures that we as industry would like states to reconsider and actually avoid implementing. And I've listed a few, like quarantine. For us, quarantine equals a border closure. So that's something that it's actually causing the opposite effect that we want to pursue, which is opening the borders and restarting the demand and incoming travelers to the countries. COVID testing that does not comply with the criteria of reliability, speed, and scalability. In many of these countries and cities, not only in the Caribbean but throughout the region, access to these tests is quite difficult. So that's a problem when we're starting to restart the operation. The use of valid medical certificates also. We prefer states requesting the passenger health data to be declared via online portals to avoid the use of medical certificates that can be forged and can be easily downloaded by the internet or to the internet and presented upon checking. So that's something that we must also work with governments. Also, some states imposing fines for non-compliance for both passengers and airlines, which actually, as well as the other measures, have an opposite effect on restarting operations. Holding passengers on the aircraft upon arrival to ensure social distancing is maintained at all times at the terminal. Testing for crew members, as you are all aware, crew should be subject to different type of measures as the ones applicable for passengers. The use of paper forms for health declarations in many states that are even requiring both the online and paper form-based declarations, and some of the health charges being passed on to the passengers and added to the ticket, which also has a negative effect on restarting the travel. So these are just a list of measures that we're seeing as critical and that may pose the different effect that we're trying to pursue in this regard. Lastly, please remember that aviation is a key enabler for the socioeconomic activity in the Caribbean region and across the globe. We can be a key contributor to the economic restart, but we need to be in a position to do so. The industry cannot work in isolation on these initiatives. The government support is critical to be able to deliver on further driving the adaptation. It is up to every single one of us to make a positive impact. So my key message here is let's keep on working together and use this crisis as an opportunity, to learn and to create a future that we all desire. And with that, I will leave it there. Thank you for your time, and please count on IATA support, and feel free to reach out for us with anything in that's needed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alejandro. Very interesting presentation, giving the airline perspective. I note with interest that slide with the things that we should avoid. But what would be most interesting is the recommendations from IATA, which I'm sure we will hear you share with us during the panel discussion. Our next panelist, Melvin, Regional Director for International Civil Aviation Organization. Melvin, over to you now.
Good morning. And a pleasure for me to be here. Hopefully you're seeing my slides. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to talk about what is ICAO and the impact that it has on CARICOM and everywhere else, and what is ICAO. One thing that I was very glad to see from IATA is that the Caribbean and the member states of the Caribbean are very important to me. And I don't get offended, but I don't get happy whenever I see that all the studies talk about Latin America and the Caribbean. I really prefer to see the Caribbean, because that's a whole different impact. And that's what I'd like to see. So I want to thank IATA for taking the time to go ahead and it's the only time I like segregation. Other than that, I don't. But here, I think it's important. So anyway, the ICAO NAC regional office, and NAC stands for North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. It's accredited for the responsibility and working closely with each one of the 41 state countries. That's 21 states and 19 territories. Now, we obviously have responsibility for all CARICOM states, with the exception of Guyana and Suriname that are accredited to the South America office. Before I get into this slide, what is ICAO? We're talking, and you've heard people discuss, you've heard the distinguished panel members discuss about impacts, about actions that can be taken. And it's easy to think that everybody's doing what they want, that there is no coordination, that it's every island for itself, every state for itself. And that's really not the reality. ICAO was created in 1944 to establish the global standards for aviation and anything that touches aviation, so that we would have a coordinated effort to ensure safe, secure, environmentally and public health-wise sound systems of aviation, that if your country meets international standards, then every other state, every other country should accept that and should recognize that. And that allows for that open borders, open connectivity, and allowing states to fly from one to another without worrying about, is this aircraft going to crash? Are my people going to be safe? What's going on? No, there are global standards. And ICAO is the global forum for establishing those standards with 193 member states. Okay, I'm not going to go into the traffic issue and much of the finance, because I believe my colleagues have already shown that. But I will go into what are the actions that ICAO has been taking since this started. We did develop what's called the CART, which is the Council of Aviation Recovery Task Force. All 193 member states are represented by 36 states that form the council in ICAO. And then the Secretariat, led by Dr. Fang Liu, implements those recommendations or ensures that the countries are meeting them. We audit the states, and my office assists the states to overcome the challenges in meeting international standards. But what the CART report did, it came up with some documents in takeoff guidance is called, and you heard IATA talk about they've broken these guidelines and this guidance into more manageable, easily interpretable things that can be implemented and actions that can be implemented. ACI for airports also is doing some of this, and we're recognizing, because we are working together. We are working together. This cannot be done by any individual person or entity. So some of the key principles that came out of the CART report is we must make sure that we are protecting people with harmonized but flexible measure, that we work as an aviation team. Barbados or Bahamas or Jamaica cannot solve their problem and think that that's going to solve the issue if the other states don't have their problem solved. This is a team effort, and CARICOM more than anybody, I think, knows that. We wanted to actively manage safety, security, health-related risks, and you've heard even the executive director talk about risk and risk management. Make sure that the health systems, we strengthen public confidence. This is one of the challenges that we're going to have. How do we build that public confidence again for people to want to get on those aircraft and want to create and want to travel and build that tourism that is so essential for our region? We wanted to distinguish restart from recovery, because one is going to be a lot longer than the other. And I think IATA has shown that. Support financial relief. We're working with World Bank and we're working with organizations and with the states. And Ayada, I think, also mentioned some of the issues that can help. And we want to ensure sustainability. These efforts must be sustainable because we want a sustainable contribution to the economies of our region. And as always, have the lessons learned. So we also have developed what we call implementation packages to assist the states. And as a matter of fact, we are delivering these. The first of these implementation packages will be delivered in the Caribbean because, you know, I want to make sure that we are taking a vanguard to the forefront of this and work towards getting our islands and our states up and running in the best possible way. So we have implementation packages that we're working with the region on implementing, and those will be done within the next few months. Again, some of the CART recommendations and the recommendations all have what we call implementation procedures. So we're looking at the recommendations, and then we develop the global implementation roadmap, which we just held a meeting with all the director generals in the region and over 200 participants to talk about what does that implementation look like. So we're moving forward with that, and it covers, as you see, safety, air drones, air navigation services, public health measures, facilitation, aviation security, transport economics. So all these things are part of that. We also have the CASCAP program. And the CASCAP program is a program that looks at the management, the collaborative arrangement for the prevention and management of health events in civil aviation. And this has been a tremendous benefit to all of us in bringing us together and implementing solutions to address the issues that we're facing. We also have what's called the public health corridor. And you heard about Ayada talk about the challenge of having to take the crew members and isolate them and put them in quarantine and stuff. So the public health corridor tries to ensure that there's a clean crew, a clean aircraft, clean airports as we go through the whole travel process to ensure that there is containment, okay? And we also have forms that come as part of this that we expect the states to fill out and to take part in. So that's, and CARICOM and ICAO Public Key Directory, we use, this is to be able, for the states to be able to read the electronic passports, but you must be part of the PKD, the Public Key Directorate. You must be a member. Right now, I believe only Barbados is a member from the region, and we hope that more of the region becomes signs up for this. We're assisting the ECA states, and that's 6 states that we're looking at in addressing a lot of the issues with them to make them stronger and to make them more effective and efficient. And in fact, this will, by strengthening ECA, strengthening the OECS states, we're going to be strengthening the whole of CARICOM. And we're doing a lot of work with them in a lot of webinars and a lot of training and these kinds of things. And then one thing that has been requested by CARICOM, or that's part of the desires of CARICOM, is to have one-stop security. This is something that we're also very open to in assisting the states in understanding the challenges of one-stop security, what it really takes, and we're open to assisting. I've always offered this, and we continue to work towards achieving one-stop security, and we stand ready to assist in that. So I think that's about my time, and I wanted to stay within that time frame. And I thank you very much for having us here, and we'll look to answer your questions. What we cannot answer now, we'll definitely get back to you and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melvin. Excellent presentation. And again, what is the common theme that is coming out with our presentations is that we have to be united in our approach. It's no single agency entity that can handle this pandemic alone. But by bringing our unique resources together, then certainly we can better manage the impact and the risk that is involved with the COVID-19 pandemic. Our next presenter, Colin Young, the IMO Regional Maritime Advisor. Colin, the marine aspect is very unique, especially in the Caribbean with so many islands. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, moderator. On behalf of the IMO, sincere thanks are conveyed to CARICOM IMPACS for the invitation to contribute to this important conference. Greetings to my fellow panelists and a pleasant day to all online. This presentation attempts to address the human element in the ship-shore interface and the facilitation of the exchange of cargo, which continues unabated through the COVID-19 pandemic, delivering vital goods, including medical supplies and foodstuffs, which are central to responding to and eventually overcoming this pandemic. It is therefore crucially important that the flow of commerce by sea should not be unnecessarily disrupted. At the same time, however, the safety of life at sea and protection of the marine environment must also remain. Consequently, the IMO has issued a number of circular letters containing practical advice and guidance on a variety of technical and operational matters for IMO member states, seafarers, and shipping related to the coronavirus. The link in the presentation guides you to the related webpage. But when we turn specifically to the ship-to-shore interface, the pandemic has created issues associated with the shipboard interface between seafarers and shore-based personnel during port calls following conflicting procedures to mitigate the risk of infection. Differing procedures and requirements are being set globally for shore-based workers by relevant entities compared with those being set by flag states and shipping companies to be followed on board by seafarers. The IMO Secretary General consequently received proposed guidelines from a broad cross-section of global industry associations in consultative status with the IMO, on the basis of which circular letter number 4204/16 was issued. The objective of all parties in the ship-shore interface should be to keep everyone as safe as possible at all times, regardless of whether they are seafarers serving on board a ship or shore-based workers temporarily coming on board, and not to place anyone at undue risk or in a position they feel is unacceptable. Requirements and guidance as applicable to individuals can be seen to differ from state to state and company to company. And these differences regarding what should and should not be applied with respect to managing risks related to COVID-19 is creating perceptions that some parties are not following appropriate procedures, even though the procedures being followed may be those required by a responsible party. Due to the differing views globally regarding what risk-based measures are appropriate during the pandemic, relating to interactional PPE, social distancing, hygiene, and testing, consequently, risk management and communication become crucial aspects of the ship-to-shore interface to ensure that risks and impacts are managed to a tolerable level and proportionate measures are established to reduce, control, and manage the risks that COVID-19 poses to all persons. Organizations providing shore-based service to personnel to ships, such as agents, chandlers, inspectors, pilots, stevedores, surveyors, service engineers, and the whole gamut, and authorities responsible for immigration officers, customs officers, port state control inspectors, etc., should implement risk-based procedures and guidance for their employees related to COVID-19 within their internal procedures, based on the latest guidance from the International Maritime Health Association, WHO, and local port and national requirements as appropriate, taking into consideration the hierarchy of controls identified in the circular that may guide the establishment of effective safety control measures and reduce risks, which are listed here. For your awareness, as was mentioned by Wayne earlier, the IMO coordinated a project funded by Norway for the implementation of a generic maritime single window in Antigua and Barbuda. The project is now complete, fully functional, and being tested. At the workshop for senior maritime administrators held in St. Lucia in March this year, Antigua and Barbuda shared a number of benefits that have accrued out of the use of the maritime single window, all leading to the improvement of trade facilitation. One critical benefit in the current circumstances is the ability to authorize clearance of a ship to begin operations without the need for government authorities and private entities to board the ship. The IMO welcomes receiving requests for assistance from states for the establishment of maritime single windows in their countries. Further on, the Secretary General also issued circular letter number 4204/14, in which governments are urged to consider a practical and pragmatic approach in these unusual times in the context of issues related to crew changeovers, resupply, repairs, survey and certification, and licensing of seafarers. The framework of protocols covers in detail the travel and movement of seafarers to and from ships for the purpose of effecting crew changes. This includes various locations and potential locations throughout the process of crew change and travel, and the periods of time when there may be risks that need to be managed and controlled in the process. The framework also takes into account the differences in the risks that may need to be managed with regard to travel for the purposes of joining a ship and travel after leaving a ship for repatriation. Additionally, it is suggested that governments encourage seaports, airports, and airlines to prepare information on their measures and requirements related to COVID-19 for use by shipping companies and seafarers and potentially other stakeholders concerned in order to facilitate safe ship crew changes and travel during the pandemic. IMO's Circular 4204/6 provided a number of recommendations for governments and relevant national authorities on the facilitation of maritime trade during the COVID-19 pandemic, on measures to facilitate ship crew changes that could grant seafarers appropriate exemptions as essential personnel to facilitate joining or leaving their ships. The shipping industry, however, is on the verge of a humanitarian crisis, as mentioned by Michael in his opening, due significantly to hundreds of thousands of seafarers on ships being collateral victims of this global calamity, as travel restrictions have left them stranded on ships or unable to join ships. Their professionalism, however, ensures that the goods we all need are delivered safely and with minimal impact on our precious environment. Designating seafarers as essential personnel will ensure that seafarers are exempted from travel restrictions and are able to travel to and from ships, a key element in allowing crew changes to take place. Crew changes are not only essential for the health and well-being of the seafarers themselves, but they're also vital to ensure commercial ships can continue to carry essential goods safely and without unnecessary interruptions. Recently, a seafarer on a ship in the Caribbean suffered a heart attack aboard ship, and it required around 5 hours of negotiations with the various government entities to get the seafarer ashore to hospital. It is because of such incidents which occurred globally that the IMO established a Seafarer Crisis Action Team to liaise with relevant government personnel. We continue to call on governments to establish appropriate harmonized protocols to facilitate seafarer crew changes. Moderator, I thank you.
Thank you for that, Colin. Excellent presentation. It's very interesting, that last point you raised with the maritime person having a heart attack and then have to be going through 5 different agencies to be allowed onshore so that emergency treatment could be administered to him. And that incident really highlights the importance of cooperation. It also outlines, to be very frank, how ridiculous things have become in some areas, because a health emergency and a heart attack is an emergency, And regardless of what, we should have, wherever it was, we should have applied the protocols to save a life, which is most important. Last but not least, Mr. Donnie Brown, Vice President of Maritime Policy, Cruise Lines and International Association. Donnie, we're most anxious to hear from you because your industry in particular is so important to the Caribbean. And in this pandemic, we know the cruise ship industry has been very impacted. So we look forward to hearing from you now. What will be the way forward?
Thank you, Andrew. And let me reciprocate in just emphasizing how important the Caribbean is to the cruise industry. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to CARICOM IMPACS for initiating this session. It's my pleasure to join these fellow panelists to add to their insights today on behalf of Cruise Lines International Association. As you may know, CLIA is the trade association representing the industry globally. Our members make up 90 to 95% of cruise capacity worldwide, as well as the broader cruise community, including travel agents and executive partners, many of which are ports and destinations. We do this alongside another industry association in the Caribbean, FCCA, and as this is the largest cruise operating area in the world. Together, we know that the impacts of COVID pandemic have been devastating on business and economies, especially in the Caribbean, where we all look forward to a resumption of cruise passenger operations when it's the right time to do so, and when we can do so with the assurances of safety, security, and health. To that end, we really appreciate the opportunity like this to provide updates and to hear your comments, questions, and concerns. I work closely with member cruise line professionals in the security, medical, and public health communities via CLIA work groups and committees. We share information and best practices to provide for the health and safety of passengers and crew on our ships and for the destinations from where we sail and to which we visit. The industry, as many know, has a strong record for a number of things in the health arena, including robust cleaning and disinfection protocols, pre-embarkation screening, onboard prevention, surveillance, and response procedures to minimize risk of introduction and transmission of illness on board, as well as medical facilities and staffing for onboard treatment, consistent with the guidelines provided by the American College of Emergency Physicians, which has been adopted by policy industry-wide, as well as our coordination with health authorities, most prominently the CDC Vessel Sanitation Program for its inspections and procedures, which are carried forward throughout the greater North American region. Cruise line security professionals are committed to the safety and security of guests and in the destination ship's visit using innovative technologies, including what many have seen as an increased prevalence of biometrics to facilitate the guest passenger experience, but also to promote cooperation with shoreside customs officials for passenger processing. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the industry recognizes that this record must be enhanced and adapted as we move forward into a new normal and contemplate a return to service. I wanted to provide you a quick update on what we've been doing since the pandemic began. As many know, we've had a voluntary suspension worldwide of cruise passenger operations, which are only beginning to start in some areas where it's been the virus has been less prevalent. But for the most part, we've been suspended. And in June, the industry agreed to continue that voluntary suspension from the United States through September of this year, with the need to revisit it on an ongoing basis. We've been focused, much as Colin had alluded to, on crew care during this time for those essential workers who remain on board CLIA Cruise Line memberships globally, focused on facilitating crew changes with international authorities like the IMO, the International Labor Organization, and consistent with World Health Organization guidance, and to repatriating crew members to their home for much needed rest and crew changes. It's given us the opportunity to focus on how we can move forward with enhancing shipboard procedures along a full spectrum of cruise line operations during this time as we watch the science evolve and get a better knowledge base on detection, testing, quarantine, as well as treatment. And the lines continue to develop plans and protocols at the cruise line level to enhance their public health measures. At the industry level, we are involved in all of that. And to that end, we are developing industry level policy that learns from each of the cruise lines' plans and their protocols as they work individual authorizations and coordination with shoreside health authorities to accommodate operations in the future. What we see coming together is a policy at an industry level that is holistic, that addresses the virus from the full spectrum of cruise operations, from the time of booking and how we communicate with future passengers to through the cruise experience all the way till the guest gets back home, along enhanced cleaning and disinfection, social distancing, preventive measures on board, enhanced medical staffing, coordinated reporting, and coordination with regional and local health authorities wherever we operate. These type of measures, including the swift identification of potential illness and an appropriate response coordinated with shoreside health authorities, is necessary and imperative in order to provide that overall health security that operating area and destinations expect. Technology can be a key component to this and can be integrated, whether it's through biometrics or other shipboard technologies that are touchless, but that can assist with social distance monitoring, tracking and tracing, and general shipboard crowd management. These efforts are well underway and are expanding our knowledge base every day. As they continue, CLIA participates in Blue Ribbon panels that our members have assembled with scientific experts, has helped host scientific summits, and participates in task force efforts to inform progress on our engagement with multiple stakeholders. And that engagement can only continue and increase as we move forward towards sailing at an appropriate time. I look forward to your questions and to the discussion here, and want to thank you again. Back over to you, Andrew. I think you're still muted, Andrew.
Are you there, Andrew?
Thank you, Donnie. All right, we have now open. Thank you for your interesting presentation. We're now opening the floor to questions, but just a couple of questions I'd like to lead off with for our panelists. I'll start off with Alejandro. In your presentation, you had expressed some things that we should avoid. But in looking at some of what you're recommending, it would appear to be things that many member states are implementing as part of their process to effectively screen passengers and help to curtail the spread of the pandemic. How do we reconcile those requirements, the needs of IATA and the airlines, and the needs of the states in protecting their general population and creating that level of reassurance to persons coming to the country?
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Yeah, it's to begin with, we need to admit it's a very thin and difficult, challenging aspect there. We have to balance, as you correctly mentioned, the need to restore that passenger confidence in traveling, ensure that passengers are safe to fly and arrive into a destination, and also ensure that the countries are also free of COVID. Our ask primarily is for states that are actually imposing or implementing a series of measures to actually address the fact that in some cases we're seeing countries implementing not only testing requirements, but also, for example, quarantine. So even if you have a testing on departure and the passengers must certify that they carry their own test and that they're negative, in some cases, they're also being required to quarantine at least for 7 days. And as I mentioned in my presentation, those type of measures, when the passenger has to quarantine upon arrival, actually may act as a barrier or as a deterrent for travel. So if states are trying to reopen their borders and get those passengers coming in as tourism or business travelers, and we as airlines are also trying to reactivate those operations into a single country, we must strike that balance and determine how to best address the current crisis and the situation and the health issues with the measures being imposed. So it's a matter of establishing that balance and not imposing stringent or like extra measures that might cause the contrary.
All right, thank you for that, Alejandro. Wayne, this question is for you. As a chief of immigration, what are some of the measures that you have put in terms of embracing the new norms, social distancing, greater sanitization, and how do you work with your other counterparts in managing the passenger process?
Thank you, Andrew. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Yeah. We work very closely with our stakeholders, Customs and Excise Department, GAI Inc. Those are that's the airport, the Royal Barbados Police Force, as well as the airlines. With respect to some of the protocols we put in place, in terms of sanitization, as you may recall, we utilize kiosks at the airport, and GAI Inc. is responsible for sanitizing kiosks after each person goes to the actual kiosk. Additionally, persons are required when they enter the airport, when they enter that section of the airport, to sanitize their hands before they actually use the kiosk. So in terms of sanitization, that is a protocol that's been put in place. Social distancing, there's a requirement for social distancing when persons approach the kiosk or if they are approaching the desk, the immigration desk at the airport as well too. In terms of the actual immigration officers, they are also required to sanitize regularly, as well as if need be to do other measures that would allow them to protect themselves from the COVID-19 virus. So there are lots of measures in place. We are not handling any forms at all. basically we have an online form, and we are not at the airport processing any passports or any types of paper.
Okay, thanks for that. Melvin, the ICAO has been instrumental in bringing out passenger data, which will certainly be a very critical tool for governments and for countries to screen persons coming into their territories. What are some of the additional things from an ICAO perspective, or that we could better manipulate that data to ensure that we're getting the best value for it, such as PNR, DCS, IAPIS? You know, there's a wealth of passenger data, but are we really getting the value for that passenger data?
Well, I think the Executive Director Jones said it best. We must not lose the opportunity to learn from this challenge. And one of the things that we're looking at, as you rightfully indicate, we already have mechanisms that require certain data to be reported by the airlines and by the states, such as the airline passenger information, as well as the passenger name records and stuff. One is mandatory, which is the API, so that has to be sent. The PNR is a recommendation, but I think we have the opportunity, and we are working on this in headquarters. We have groups looking at what additional information can be added to this that would address a lot of the lessons learned from this item. So we're looking at doing those things right now and increasing that. Cybersecurity was mentioned throughout the presentations, and this is one of the biggest challenges that we have. Is we want to make sure that once you're sharing personnel data, that you're able to secure that data. So we want to make sure that there's good protections in there, and we're strongly promoting cybersecurity initiatives within all the member states. So those are some of the things that we're doing to ensure that we get more value for the information. Same thing with when we talk about the PKD, the Public Key Directorate, for you to be able to read the electronic passports so that you know that this is validated data on this passport. We want to make sure that as many states as possible continue to join and populate this data to allow for better security throughout the global aviation system.
All right, thank you, Melvin. Albert, from a CCLEC perspective, the focus, many persons, those see the relationship between passengers and cargo and luggage, and certainly the opportunity that this might present for the spreading of the pandemic. But the fact is that trade is still very important. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the recommendations that CCLEC is putting forward to ensure that luggage and cargo are not vectors for the virus in these times?
Some of the recommendations that we would make, and also even the WCO, and I would mention that there was a template sent out from the WCO requesting from customs administrations information as to what they're doing and their protocols in respect of dealing with the protection of the society, the protection of their own staff and so on. And I could give you an example of Antigua. I'll give you an example of Antigua, and I will also mention something that CCLEC has also done. One of the questions, measures aiming to the facilitation of cross-border movement or relief and essential supplies. Here you have cargo, etc. There was another one, measures aiming at supporting the economy and sustaining supply chain continuity. Another one, measures aiming at protecting customs administration staff. For example, let's look at this one. It's closer to your question. It was to ensure that there is sufficient inventory of protective gear and gloves and sanitizers and so on, so that they could be used by staff and also by the general public where they need it. Obviously, many cannot come into the buildings or into the cargo sheds and handle cargo, whether staff or the public during these periods. But there is also the provision by the administration of these sanitary requirements to make sure that staff are not affected, and also the requirement that the public must wear masks and other forms, and also use sanitizers and so on when they're coming to customs for services. Also, the need to use more X-ray systems wherever they exist. That was one of the requirements. To use more X-ray equipment and other scanning equipment, non-intrusive scanning equipment, where these things exist, to make sure that there is as little interaction with the cargo especially by the public and also the staff. Another important measure was that customs needs to move a lot quicker towards the digitization of its forms. Well, of course, the Asecuda World system handles the customs declarations and so on, but there are still a number of processes that require actual manuscript prepared and handed forms. And of course, that is one of the things, to do that as little as possible to make sure that there is less opportunity for transmission of diseases, even from cargo itself, and also allowing passengers to open their luggage, much more of that than officers interacting with it, and also using the X-ray systems, as I mentioned, a lot more to do non-intrusive checks to avoid unnecessary interaction.
All right, thanks for that. Donnie, I have a question here for you. How can cruise ships reassure, or how can ships reassure the cruise industry that safety measures will be adhered to?
Yeah, thank you for relaying the question, Andrew. That is a great question. It's an essential question, and one that has to be satisfied to make sure we meet the level of assurance needed from destinations to safely sail. It's a business imperative for the industry, one that once we restart cruise operations with passengers, certainly those lines want to sustain those sailings, and will not be able to do so if they can't provide that assurance that their measures are providing for the safety, health of the passengers, the crew, and the destinations we visit. I mentioned in my briefing about policy commitment with regard to risk mitigation for COVID, introduction and transmission on board ships. That policy would, while it's not fully developed at this point, when it is, and when it's time to sail, that would be adopted industry-wide. It would be mandatory for our members, and its provisions would be incorporated into safety management systems, the SMS on board ships. What that means is that it would be subject to internal and third-party audit, which could be conducted by a classification society with which the ships work in conjunction with the ship's administration, the flag state. It's also subject to the coordination with health authorities in the regions where we operate and the destinations we sail, and port state control inspection by the authorities in the locations to which we sail. So I think through a combination of those measures and the business imperative nature of it, that is how ships can be in a position to provide that level of assurance. And that will play out over time. Certainly the coordination with regional health authorities like CARFA, like PAHO, and with the authorities in each port where we visit and are subject to health inspections. The reporting has to be to the satisfaction level, and the coordination has to meet and satisfy the destination's needs. Thanks.
All right, thanks for that, Donnie. Next question here. There's a converse risk posed by underutilized pilots, ground crews, and air traffic controllers. These are perishable skills. How will these risks be mitigated? I think that's for you, Alejandro, from Amayata.
You were mentioning something on pilots, Andrew. Sorry, I didn't get it right.
Pilots, air traffic controllers, ground crews. With so many airlines flights being grounded, and these skills, it's they are perishable. What is being done by the aviation industry to mitigate the risk of losing this skill set?
Yeah, we're actually I wouldn't say promoting, but ensuring that the training and the qualifications of these air traffic controllers and others that also work in the airport are currently or maintained and valid, to ensure that when the services are actually able to perform their jobs and tasks as required.
Melvin, you have any contribution to that?
Yes, I do. Thank you, moderator. So ICAO actually has standards for personnel licensing, for rules of the air, airworthiness of the aircraft, all in our annexes. Standards of the minimum requirements and things are there for each state to meet. We also have what's called, which has been very active since COVID, the electronic filing of differences. And what that does is that lets each state say, look, we were required to have our pilots recertified or reinitiated under this standard by this period of time. However, because of COVID, we're extending that. And that's the state that does that. The civil aviation authorities grant those exemptions or those differences, and then they provide those differences under the electronic filing of differences, which means that for you to go ahead and reinitiate, you have to have a plan as a member state for how you're going to ensure safe and secure aviation as you restart and reinitiate your aviation system. So there are standards for this. There's differences that have been filed, and each member state can access what the other state is or is not doing. And that's what allows to build the global confidence that, hey, look, the international standards are actually being met. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Melvin. Colin, one of the points you mentioned was the fact that seafarers across the globe have met a number of challenges, and the one that most succinctly brought it out was the issue of the gentleman who suffered a heart attack. What has IMO done to assist states and countries and even authorities in respective countries to help to reduce this red tape and maybe unnecessary risks bordering on paranoia?
Thank you, Andrew. I was beginning to get a little jealous there. I thought you were leaving me out of the hot seat. We have been issuing a number of circulars which provide guidance to states, seafarers, well, the industry as a whole, from January, 31st of January this year. We're up to number 25, as well as there are other pieces of information which allows states to get an idea of what some of the protocols, procedures that can be put in place to facilitate seafarers in these challenging times. As I mentioned as well, we have created a team which, whenever seafarers are being challenged to do those transfers, particularly those instances where there are health issues, non-related COVID-19 health issues, that there has been contact communication with governments to get them to understand the challenges that the seafarers are facing. There are other issues such as the inability to update their visas for travel. This is one of the reasons why we're asking governments to use their officers, their book, seafarer book, as a mechanism by which they can be recognized as a seafarer and therefore allow them passage or facilitate easier passage through airports to the ships, to and off their ships as well. So these are some of the things that IMO has been urging governments to consider when to treat with the seafarer issues, because many of them have been working beyond the limit of their contracts. According to the ILO, that should be a maximum of 11 months, but yet we have seafarers on a ship for more than 15 months at a time. So we can only urge, invite, encourage states to consider seafarers as essential personnel so that they can be better facilitated during these challenging times. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for that, Colin. Question, and I open it to the panel in general. In many countries, even within CARICOM, airports and seaports are being privatized as part of many governments' initiatives to reduce the drain on public funds. And by outsourcing these airports and the ports, they pose different kinds of challenges, which is also a new norm. What then is, how do we then, as regulating agencies, ensure that airports and seaports, which are now under private operation, maintain the level of health and security protocols that will ensure that the country provides reassurance both locally and overseas to persons coming into the country? Who would like to take that one? I throw it out.
I guess I'll start. I'm sure my colleagues will also jump in. I think one of the things to be clear about is the role of the regulator and the role of the service provider. If an airport is privatized or is state-owned, there is still a role for the regulator to oversee that airport's compliance with international standards and implementing those requirements. And that has to be very different. So it comes down to the role of the regulator, the role of the service provider. And that's very clear in this example. With regards to should an airport be state-owned or should it be privatized? All different models. My personal, as Melvin Cintron, my personal, what I like the best is the scenario of public-private partnership. Public in the sense that the state needs to ensure for the safety and security of its people. So from that perspective, the public aspect of it. At the same time, it is very difficult, especially in our states, for a government to take on all and run an airport as a Fortune 500 company or as a company, a very private company, with the efficiencies that come with that. So that's what the private sector brings in, that management, and a lot of times even that investment that needs to be made to bring the airport up to standards. So to me personally, public-private partnership tends to be one of the best scenarios to have, but the main thing is there always needs to be a regulator that oversees for compliance with international standards and the service provider.
Thanks for that, Melvin. Any other feedback on that question?
Sure, Andrew. I would echo what Melvin from ICAO just stated, and the fact of or the need of states to actually adhering to the recommendations in relation to the insurance of the traveling public that flying is safe. I think that's something that we are actually pushing for very much so with other countries, ensuring that whatever type of health measures are being applied are actually in line with ICAO's recommendations. So I think that's the baseline for reassuring that confidence back to the passengers that you were speaking about earlier, and working with industry to ensure that all those measures actually do not impede what we're trying to achieve, which is actually restarting that operation regionally. Thanks.
Thanks, Alejandro. Colin, anything from the marine side as it relates to the outsourcing of ports?
No, Andrew, not at all. I think regardless of whether it's a public or private port, the regulations or procedures, protocols, whatever are put in place would impact similarly in either case. It is just that the consideration for the seafarers has not yet been given by government to facilitate that transfer for crew changes and repatriation. So that essentially is the challenge at the moment. Thank you, Andrew.
I can't allow CARICOM Impacts to get off the hook. What has CARICOM Impacts been doing to ensure that we have a harmonized approach to this COVID-19 pandemic? We have 15 member states which have taken different. Are we currently collecting best practices to establish a common framework across the region?
Thank you very much, Andrew. As you well know, we have been working very much in a collaborative spirit, not only amongst our subunit departments, i.e. between Customs, Immigration, Police, and the law, but certainly with our other regional stakeholders. So in terms of developing a policy for reopening, certainly we would have made reference to the best practices that would have been recommended by both ACI, IATA, ICAO, and the like. And in addition to working with the CARFers and so on, we would have made recommendations to the heads of government in terms of the considerations that they would need to undertake in making the decision in how best they open up their borders. And not only in terms of what protocols that will be put in place, but in terms of things, for example, like the sequencing of who they should give priority to for readmission into the country. So the same way how, for example, Colin would have spoken about the number of persons that would have been left, quote unquote, stranded, essentially at sea, there would have been a number of persons, or a large number, that are basically stranded abroad. So whether it is the case that you went on vacation and was unable to get back home before your borders were closed, these are some things that can have political implications as well. And then certainly within this year, 2020 is a year where we've had and will have several elections in our member states, trying to deal with all of these issues and the different dimensions. It started off as a public health crisis, economic impact of it. There were some international relations concerns as well. And things like this can also have a political implication. But to answer the question directly, we've worked collaboratively with our peers, like I said, and make recommendations to the head. But at the end, 14 of them being sovereign states would make the best determination as to how it sees fit for their own country.
Thank you for that, Colonel Jones. As the topic suggests, COVID-19 and the future of borders. What is COVID-19 now changing the definition of what a border is? Because many of us think of a border as a hard line, where we at our ports of entry, airport, seaports. But in order to successfully manage COVID, we have to move our borders forward to the point where a person embark on aircraft, because we have to start the screening. Is this the future of the border and border security now? I throw that out to the panel. Now, Wayne, would you like to take the first shot at it?
I'm a little older than Wayne. I was in 1B1 and he was in 1A1. So I'll go first, Wayne, and then you can jump in there. But seriously, and I basically just want to make reference to Albert's presentation when he talked about the mobility of borders. And essentially, I think that is the point that we need to hone in on and harness. In essence, that and while you raise this question in the context of COVID, it has great applicability to whether we are dealing with the whole issue of irregular migration, the trafficking of weapons, the trafficking of drugs, and that sort of business. It is to essentially extend our borders as far out as possible. So whether it is the case that we can leverage technology and legislation such as PNR, for example, that will give us the opportunity to see those persons that are intending of coming to our countries, but by legal means, as far as 72 hours ahead. Whether it's COVID or, like I said, we need to establish relationships or partnerships, which is another term that was being used throughout the course of this week, that we can share information and intelligence between whether it is the source, destination, or transit countries, that we can, have a better handle on what is coming our way early and what shape or form those threats are presenting themselves to our member states. So I just wanted to, sort of encapsulate some of the things that were discussed before and how we could address this issue. And not only in terms of COVID, like I said, but all the different transnational threats that beface us. It's your turn now, Wayne.
Wayne?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for going first and being older than me. I agree with what Michael has said. I think that the borders now have been extended because we now have to detect very early whether or not travelers present potential health risks to each country. And given that we now have to be more forward thinking, we have to put a lot of additional procedures and practices in place so we can have that detection done well in advance of those persons coming into the country. So entry now, with respect to the issues posed by COVID-19, is not deemed when a person enters the airport. It is deemed from the time the person contemplates that they want to travel. And also, it's not only for the airport security or the airport border security agencies. The person who's seeking to travel must also recognize that the border begins from the time he or she determines that they want to travel, because they must do some essential things so that it will be accepted in the country. So I would say, yes, I think the borders have been extended, and it is the new norm with respect to post-COVID-19.
If I may add from the airline perspective, and I think this is a very good question on how we see borders now post-COVID. I think there are a lot of challenges that we need to face. Obviously, the use of technology to ensure less passenger interaction with agents at the airport, and use of technology to avoid that physical manipulation of touch points is something that industry is moving forward. We as IATA see this crisis as an opportunity to keep pushing all those initiatives that we've been working for in the past years. For example, the One ID initiative, biometrics, etc., deployment, the use of API PNR data for better risk assessments, and how we compile that information with biotechnology and biometrics, I mean. So the point here is also that these technologies that we're seeing states starting to implement also pose some extra vulnerabilities and failures that could also have a negative effect on border security per se. So, for example, in identity fraud and irregular migration, cross-border criminal activities, and terrorism. So that entire framework has now to be expanded to include also public health associated concerns and risk assessments that need to be done post COVID. That's something that we need to start thinking about as well. And in relation to border management per se, well, the removal of visa processing hurdles in order to promote and reactivate that tourism is something that also has to be explored. How can we enhance tourism? How can we work as industry with tourism authorities worldwide and regionally to enhance that possibility of travelers incoming into the countries? And how do we ensure that the data being transmitted by the airlines and captured by the airlines for their own purposes and the data captured by the states for their own purposes is actually shared between all these authorities in order to not only perform better risk assessments, but also control that movement between borders? So it's a huge challenge, but I think as I mentioned, the crisis is an opportunity for us to think forward and think into the future on how do we actually get these moving. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Alejandro. And in fact, that is one of the points that I was going to raise. Yes, we have all identified clearly the risks, but are there opportunities coming out and opportunities for border security agencies, regulators, and new opportunities to reshape how we address the issues of borders? I hear Alejandro speak about the removal of visas, but what opportunities are there? One of the things that came out prior was the issue of the new approach to border security. Is this now a new opportunity for us to develop some kind, and maybe the CARICOM can lead on this, in terms of developing a new approach to border security? What would shape this new paradigm that we are now operating? Because let's face it, we have COVID-19, we had SARS, we had Ebola, we had MERS. Next year will be somewhere chikungunya, Zika, you name it. There'll always be something else that comes out. So this is an opportunity. And what other opportunities? We have seen from WhatsApp videos going around what is happening in Abu Dhabi. Are these opportunities for CARICOM too, to take a different approach? Colonel, I don't know if you would like to take this one.
I will certainly take a stab at it and start. And again, we should use these opportunities, like I said, to be a catalyst for change. And while certainly recommendations could be made, certainly to the heads as a collective, at the end of the day, they're going to make a decision based on sovereignty for their own national interest. And then certainly there are going to be political and international relation concerns inside there. So for example, if it was to go down the vein as it relates to without visas, and you have better persons that can answer in this regard than myself. But the whole application of a visa could be one of either A, reciprocity, 2, managing risk, or 3, generating revenue. But I mean, when we look across the region itself, within CARICOM, you don't have a uniformity as it relates to, for example, how many of us recognize a one-state China, for example. So certainly, while there are opportunities to, to be taken advantage of, there would, I believe, will be a requirement of normalizing how collective decisions are taken within CARICOM and adhered to going forward. And like you said, as well as alluded to by myself in my opening statement, particularly in the domain of these public health emergencies of international concern, they are occurring with a greater frequency. So having had the scare of Ebola in 2013, you've now had a global reset in 2020 with this. There is no reason at all why we should have a ha-ha moment, how could this happen going forward, particularly where the catalyst is within the public health domain. And if you're to expand it even wider, we had a reset in 2001 in terms of a terrorist event on September 11th. We had a financial crisis in 2008, 2009. We have a health pandemic in this 2020. And somewhat being cyclical, almost every 8 to 10 years or so, you have a global catastrophe. This one has pushed us more into the domain of cyber. And I think it behooves us, certainly within the security, as well as responsible agencies, to sort of anticipate and do a what if could possibly be if such a crisis within the cyber domain, and start to anticipate, the possible fallouts therefrom, so that our member states could be better prepared for it. But essentially, again, while we do our best as a multilateral agencies and make these recommendations to CARICOM, until and unless there is some system of supranationalization, most or the best we could do is to give the best advice and hope that there's uniformity in the acceptance of it.
All right. Thanks, Colonel Jones. That's a very appropriate response. I see the opportunity here being greater coordination, both with the regulators of the airports, because we have a number of new norms: outsource airports, outsource seaports, immigration, customs, the regulating agencies, the international regulating agencies certainly need now to come together to come and set common standards. And we have seen that coming out in ICAO from their CART perspective with their task force. And in fact, we have seen some other things, measures, which even for health declaration, some recommendations, which I think should be examined and see how it can be adopted.
Andrew?
Yes?
Yeah, not across you, but I want to comment on 2 points that Michael made relevant to catalysts for change and opportunity. Now, remember, you spoke earlier about the 12-month Barbados welcome stamp, or rather the welcome stamp, because Barbados is not the only country that is implementing it. But this really is an opportunity to seize a new market, a market of persons that want to work remotely, and also a market for persons who want to escape high-risk countries or countries that are not in as good a position as the Caribbean to come to work. So this is an opportunity that can be exploited. And if you're talking about the catalyst in this process is that there's a need to ensure that the complete process is done online. So I see this as answering both questions relating to catalysts, a catalyst for change, as well as an opportunity. And as we go on, we will recognize that we need to leverage technology, which is the key thing. We need to leverage technology in all the areas that we can at this moment, so that we can reap the benefits, if there are any, at the back of COVID-19.
Thanks for that, Wayne. That is, I need to speak to you off the air about that 12-month thing, because it's something we're considering as well here in Jamaica. We can learn from each other. We can benefit. Melvin, what is your perspective from a supra regulator, ICAO, on this? Because you tend to have a global perspective. Do you think there are opportunities here to bring both large, medium, and small states together to take advantage of this?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Definitely do think so. And one of my recommendations and inputs, especially at the CARICOM level, is that, as I have indicated, ICAO sets the standards. We develop the norms. However, we don't do that in isolation. We do it with participation from the member states. I am one that struggles because, for example, in my regional office, ask me how many people from our island states we have working in my regional office. And I can't point to them, So how involved is CARICOM in ICAO as far as being part of the decision makers in these panels that determine what those standards are that are going to apply for everybody? So I would, I am willing to fight tooth and nail to ensure that our islands are represented in ICAO in a manner that allows the island states to be part of the solution that come from the standards that are being made, that they have a say, that we have a say, not they, we, because I'm part of this with you. So I know that in the past, CARICOM has wanted to have a seat in ICAO, has wanted to be part of that. So I strongly recommend, and I know it's costly, it's not cheap sometimes, and that tends to be a problem, but I'm willing to work with you on whatever I can help to ensure that in these panels that are talking about security, cybersecurity, facilitation, border, all these things that are standards that are going to be implemented that everyone must follow, I think we also need to be part of that solution for those things that affect us as island states. So I would encourage very strongly the participation of CARICOM or its member states in many of these panels that we have in ICAO for developing and determining what the standards and recommended practices that will apply to all will be. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for that. Well, ladies, Melvin, I'll be one of the first volunteers. I'll reach out to you after this to find out how I can participate, because I agree with you. We need to be at the table. We have now come to the end of this session. It's now 11:30 my time, 12:30. Joycelyn from IMPACS. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank everyone, particularly CARICOM IMPACS, for hosting this very informative security conference. And we look forward to more of these as we go forward. I especially like to thank Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones for his keynote address today and all the persons who participated on the panel. It was a most informative session, and I think many of us have learned quite a bit today, and I look forward to us continue being in communication with each other, because it's really a team effort that will help the region and the world to overcome the issues that have been created by this pandemic. Joycelyn, I now hand over to you. Anything further?
Dear Mr. Winter, it's not Joycelyn, it's Nadine.
All right.
On behalf of CARICOM IMPACS and our viewership, we would really like to thank you for expertly leading this session. And we would want to invite other persons who are on to join us this afternoon on our session, Migration and Mobility, which starts at 1:30 p.m. EST. So again, thank you, Mr. Winter. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, viewers. Have a good afternoon and see you in in the next hour.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Be safe.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Take care.